So I said I was going to talk about um, previous relapses that I'd had, just because I think that this might actually be helpful to someone else, especially someone who perhaps isn't diagnosed yet or is still learning about the condition. Because even though I've had it on my record since 2020, I only really started to understand it in 2024. So that's only really 2 years that I've been getting to grips with it. And because it's not well known, not well understood, and so varied, it can be quite difficult to identify what's happening to you, what's MCAS, what's just normal life stresses, all of that kind of thing. So I've had like um, a mini exposure this Christmas, which I mentioned in my previous video, where I was exposed to an ingredient that I hadn't consented to eating. But it's made me reflect on the relapse that I had early last year, because it was kind of, a lot of the circumstances were similar, but a lot more mild. And I'm on the LDN now, so I didn't have such a violent reaction. Whereas the relapse that I had earlier this year is one of the worst relapses I've ever had. And I think it is because it really was a perfect storm in terms of MCAS. So apart from the fact that I'd had COVID in that, well, I presume it was COVID. I hadn't actually tested for it because I wasn't seeing anyone or leaving the house. But certainly a virus that had left my mast cells, I suppose, primed after that. I hadn't quite returned to my baseline. That was in the October. In the March, I still hadn't quite returned to the previous baseline that I'd had. And then I had to have a test where I drank the contrast dye, um, which is perfectly safe for people without MCAS. And I think even some people with MCAS can tolerate it, but especially as my triggers are particularly to do with anything I've eaten or put into my body, I do not react well to it. So I'd had that, and that would leave my mast cells in a primed state. I did have a reaction on the day, and I was quite unwell on the day. I didn't know about the 76-hour window afterwards where you're likely to be more reactive to everything, or the 6-week window when your mast cells are still primed, is the word that they used. So they're sort of on high alert. So I had the contrast dye, which was obviously the main trigger. But then a few days later, over the next sort of week or so, I had some quite stressful, more than one stressful thing going on in my personal life. So multiple emotional stresses that I was trying to manage at the same time. And then I had my birthday. Now, I wasn't aware at that point that exercise and vibration can also cause mast cells to degranulate. So I'd had a very stressful couple of weeks, and I was feeling better around the time of my birthday, and I went out and I danced with my friends. Granted, I was in my wheelchair, but I was getting up and having a little dance and then sitting down again, getting up, having a little dance, sitting down again. Also, heightened emotion can affect your mast cells. So I'd had the negative emotions of the stress that was contrasted with the euphoria of my birthday and having my friends around me and being able to have a little dance and being out and about. And I basically massively overdid it without realizing quite what damage I was doing to my mast cells. I had no idea. I had no idea about vibration. So, when I was up out of my wheelchair and having a little jump around and a little dance, like all of that was not doing my mast cells any good. And consequently, about 10 days after my birthday, I had a massive relapse, which is probably one of the worst ones I've ever had. I was completely out of action for 4 months, and very close to being hospitalized for tube feeding because the gastroparesis was just constant. So I was eating a bowl of mashed potato in the evening, and then sometimes needing to take a sleeping pill to get to sleep just because the reactions to the mashed potato were so violent. And then I wouldn't eat anything again for another 24 hours until it was time to eat mashed potato again, and then it would all set off again. So I lost a lot of weight. I think I lost something like 20 kilos or something like that quite quickly. And they were talking about admitting me for tube feeding at that point. But luckily, at that time, I got an appointment with the private ME doctor, and he said, "No, this sounds like gastroparesis." And he also diagnosed the POTS as well. So I was put on medication for gastroparesis and for POTS, and I was a lot better on those. But then that kind of plateaued in the autumn. I always get worse in the winter. The cold is another thing that triggers my mast cells. So when I started to go downhill again, I just couldn't face it, to be honest. Like the relapse that I'd had over the summer was so unthinkably horrendous that I just couldn't face the idea that I was deteriorating again. And that's when I pursued the idea of having the LDN, and I've responded really well to the LDN so far. Still early days. But yeah, so I just thought it would be useful perhaps to share that, because I had no idea in March. I knew that the contrast dye wasn't good for me, and I knew that the stress wasn't good for me. But I think I really sort of knocked the nail into the coffin with how I behaved on my birthday. And if I knew better, I still would have gone out and had a nice time on my birthday. But I might have taken it a little bit easier physically, and that might have just cushioned my nervous system a little bit more. So I hope that's useful to someone anyway, that if you've been exposed to a significant trigger, it's a really good idea to take it easy, especially the first 3 days, but also to be mindful that your mast cells will be extra sensitive for the next 6 weeks, and that exposure to any other triggers should be minimized where possible. Obviously, if you're very symptomatic, it's not always possible, but I definitely didn't need to go and bounce around on my birthday and make myself more ill. So I hope that's helpful to someone.